Hello friends, this is Team SuperSimplified and today we are here with Economic Survey 2017, Chapter 2. So the title of the chapter is The Economic Vision for Precocious and Cleavaged India. Precocious means a prematurely developed and cleavage means a sharp division. Okay, so this is a very small chapter and the chapter starts with an introduction where it explains the evolution of Indian economy. So it says that Indian economy has evolved in two phases. Right, so we will talk about these two phases of evolution of Indian economy. It says that India has embraced socialism on the eve of independence and it followed the agenda of this socialism for half a century, okay, from 1947 to 1991. And some of the main features of Indian economy during this period were economic nationalism, because we were skeptical about globalization. We doubted free trade and openness of domestic market, and we were a kind of closed economy at that time, especially when we talk in terms of imports. Protectionism, various tariff and non-tariff barriers were in place to control imports, and such was our experience during the colonial rule that we were very doubtful on the capabilities and intentions of the private sector. So government took the role of advancing India as an industrial economy, and public sector had a larger share in the industrial and commercial space of the country. So public sector took the primary role of development, and the private sector could not work without interference from the government agencies and regulators, and even the micro decisions of the private firms, like from where to procure, how much to produce, and where to trade, where not to trade. All these business related decisions were, some or the other regulation was there controlling these kind of micro decisions at the business level, right? So there was too much interference from the government into the private business. So very aptly it is called the license quota permit raj. Okay, then the year 1991 was a turning point, and there was a transformation of Indian economy here. As you must be aware that LPG reforms took place, liberalization, privatization and globalization. So this was the phase 1 of the evolution of Indian economy. Now let's come to phase 2. So phase 2 is basically the post 1991 era. So economic survey says that India has taken almost a 180-degree turn from the economic policy perspective, and it has replaced its initial socialist vision with something resembling the Washington consensus, okay, with three basic features: the open trade, open capital and reliance on private sector. And this is essentially the same development model that has been tried and proven successful in most of the countries of Southeast Asia, and reforms along these lines have been adopted by every Indian government over past quarter century, right? So let's talk about some of the recent steps in this direction. For example, so there is a lot of emphasis on ease of doing business. Government is trying to simplify its processes and procedures to bring ease of starting, running and winding up a business, and it is promoting startups and entrepreneurs like never seen before. And a lot of different steps are taken by the government. For example, single window clearances, tax holidays, subsidies, etc. All these measures are brought in to improve on the ease of doing business ranking of the country. And another step is FDI liberalization. So we are increasingly becoming more open to foreign capital, and it is actually a need of the hour for Indian economy with a huge gap in infrastructure and the capital availability. So we definitely need investment from outside the country, and there is now 100% FDI in most of the sectors, in telecom sector, in civil aviation and even in defense sector through automatic route up to a certain value, right? So this is how we are becoming more and more open towards a foreign capital. Then comes some of the other legislations, for example the GST bill, the bankruptcy code, Aadhaar bill and Companies Act 2013. So all these are actually aimed towards creating an ecosystem of higher levels of economic activity by promoting internal and external trade. Okay, so strategic disinvestment of PSUs has already started, and it is to address the issues such as underutilization of resources, lack of autonomy, depolitization of the non-essential services, and to improve public finances, right? So these are some of the steps taken by the government in the phase 2. So we are right now in the phase 2 of the evolution of Indian economy. So these are the two phases, right? So let's move to the next topic. So economic survey here says that there are 4 parameters to measure the openness of any economy. First one is openness to trade. Second one is openness to foreign capital. The third one is dominance of the PSUs in the economy. And the fourth one is share of the government expenditure in overall expenditure. So let's see what is India's performance on these 4 parameters. So here we have some interesting statistics on openness to trade. The first graph here shows the trend of trade to GDP ratio. Trade is export plus import. So here on the y-axis we have trade to GDP ratio, and on the x-axis we have population, log of population, and the red line here is the line of equilibrium, and India is above this line. As you can see here, India is above this line, which means that we are open to trade more than what is expected at our level of population, and which is a good sign. And this is against common observation. The common observation worldwide is that a large country tends to trade less as compared to a smaller country, because being large makes the benefits of trading with the outside world very low relative to trading within the country. So the opposite is true for small countries. Since they lack an internal market, their benefits of trading with the world are relatively large, hence they tend to have higher trade to GDP ratio. So a bigger country will have lower trade to GDP ratio, and a smaller country will have a higher trade to GDP ratio. For example, the large countries such as China, Brazil and US and Japan are all in the lower right hand corner. If you can see here, you have USA, you have Brazil, you have Japan. So these are on the lower right hand corner of the graph, because they are trading very less, because they are huge countries, their population is very high, so the trade is low. Okay, whereas if you see small countries, for example Thailand, Malaysia and all those, these are small countries, population is less, so they will be trading more with the outside world, because internal trade volume is very less. Okay, but this is the equilibrium line, and India is above this particular line, so India is actually trading more than what is expected from it. And this is actually a sharp turnaround from the pre-1991 situation when India was an under trader. Okay, now let's understand the second figure. On the y-axis here you have trade to GDP ratio again. Okay, this is trade to GDP ratio, and on the x-axis we have the years. So now what we are doing here is, in this graph we are comparing the growth of trade to GDP ratio over the years for India and China. The blue line represents China and the red represents India. So it shows that India's ratio has risen sharply, particularly over the decade of 2012. Okay, after that it has risen very sharply when it has doubled to around 53%. So here the peak is at around 53%. Right? And the recovery from global financial crisis in 2008 was also very swift, and as a result India's ratio now surpasses China. So you can see that India is higher than China if you compare the trade to GDP ratio, right? So initially China was on the higher side, but now India has crossed China, right? So this is what we understand from this particular graph. So openness to trade, we can give good marks to India. Now coming to the openness to foreign capital. Okay, so first graph here shows the capital flows as a percentage of GDP for India and its peer countries. Okay, and India is at a quite respectable position here in the middle, right? And the second graph shows FDI inflow into India over the years. We can see a clear growth pattern and a spike in 2016-17 financial year. Okay, so there's a huge jump here, and these statistics actually prove India's increasing openness towards foreign capital, and this thing we have already discussed, right? So let's come to the point number 3, dominance of PSUs in the economy. So public sector dominance is reducing as India has opened up for the private sector long back. For example, sectors like civil aviation, telecommunication and financial services are already open for private sector, and it is the private sector is doing good. For example, telecommunication, few years back there was only one or two players like BSNL, MTNL, BSNL, all these companies, right? Now you have so many telecom operators. Due to competition, the prices have come down, the tariffs have come down, right? Similarly, you see in the civil aviation sector, there was a dominance of Air India initially, but then the sector was opened up for the private sector, and now the prices are quite competitive, right? And now recently one more scheme has come from the government, Udan, Uday Desh Ka Aam Nagrik. So this is how the economy is evolving, and the dominance of public sector, which was an essential part of the socialist regime in the phase 1 of the evolution of Indian economy, is slowly going away, right? And private sector is coming ahead, and it is taking responsibility in the growth story of India, right? Let's come to the next slide. The point number 4 is share of government expenditure in overall expenditure. India is often accused of having an inflated and a bulky government sector, but when the size of government expenditure for a group of countries is plotted against their per capita income, India sits on the regression line, that is the equilibrium line, and it indicates that its government spending is quite natural for a country of this level of development. So we are almost at the equilibrium level, and on the x-axis you have expenditure to GDP ratio, on the y-axis you have GDP per capita, right? So this is the position of India, which is a balanced position. So what is the conclusion here? We spoke about the 4 measures of openness. So openness to trade, yeah, it is good and it is increasing. And openness to foreign capital, yeah, here also India is doing good. Next, dominance of PSUs in the economy is coming down, which is good for the economy. And share of the government expenditure and overall expenditure is also it is kind of balanced, right? So this is also good for the economy. So all the four indicators are presenting a healthy picture of Indian economy, right? So what is the conclusion here? The conclusion is the standard measure suggests that India is now a normal emerging market, which is pursuing the standard Asian development path, right? So let's move to the next slide. Now this slide talks about a precocious cleavaged democracy. It says that India has been a democracy since the starting, from the independence, from 1947, right? And it is a cleavaged society. It is a society which is divided along lines of caste, religion, color, language, region, religion. So many divisions are there in the Indian society. Still, it has seen a good growth rate. So what are the challenges in front of this kind of economy? So these are some of the long-standing challenges in front of us. For example, the first one, the ambivalence about the property rights in the private sector. So this point says that we have mixed feelings about the property rights in the private sector, because as a part of our colonial legacy, there is a deep bias against the private sector. India has a strong anti-market belief. That is why we were sticking to the socialist agenda for half a century initially. And there are deficiencies in the state capacity. And the point number 3 is inefficiency of the essential service delivery. So it says that government is not efficient enough to provide essential services to the public. For example, health and education. So quality of service in government hospitals and government schools are not up to the expectations. And the point number 4, inefficient redistribution. So it also says that there is a leakage and pilferage in the government benefit programs. Moreover, the beneficiary identification itself is a major challenge. There are a lot of exclusion and inclusion errors happening there, right? So these are some of the long-standing challenges. Now let's see them in detail. So first one is ambivalence about private sector and property rights. So economic survey says that all the societies have some ambivalence, means mixed feelings towards the private sector. After all, the basic objective of the private enterprises is to maximize the profit, and it does not always coincide with the broader social concerns, right? But the ambivalence in India is greater than elsewhere. India has a very strong anti-market belief. If you see here in this graph, they have plotted the global attitude towards the private sector. What is the attitude of the public in different countries towards the private sector? On the y-axis, you have pro-market score. How strong is the pro-market sentiment? A good feeling about the private sector. So these are the top rankers. India is far behind, because in India, the anti-market sentiment is very strong. Okay, so there is not a very good feeling about the private sector. So what are the problems because of this? There is a difficulty in privatizing public enterprises. For example, the aviation sector, there is Air India, but we have not yet privatized, though we know that it is a loss-making venture. Similarly, the airport management, the privatization has not happened till now. Only on a contract basis, some contracts are given to the private sector. And even in the banking, the banks are nationalized, it is under government control. Then excessive regulation is there. For example, agriculture sector, if you see, there's APMC Act. So a farmer cannot go to a shop of his choice. He has to go to a mandi which is assigned by the government, right? So this kind of excessive regulation is existing in the market. Then property rights. So 44th Amendment removed the Article 19(1)(f) and Article 31, and then it was replaced by Article 300A, which has made right to property from a fundamental right to a legal right. Okay, so we have ambivalence about the private sector as well as the right to property. And retrospective taxation was seen in a lot of cases. For example, Vodafone, Monsanto, the rules were applied from the back date. So this kind of retrospective taxation was also seen. So this is kind of anti-private sector or anti-market sentiment which is prevailing in India very strongly. And because of this, we have the twin balance sheet problem also, which previous year's economics survey spoke about in very detail. So what does it mean? It means that in case the private sector debts are written off, this will be seen as a favor to private sector. So this is a strong bias prevailing in the Indian society against the private sector. Okay. Now let's move to the next slide. An economic survey also says that Indian state has a very low capacity with high levels of corruption, clientelism, rules and regulations, and red tapeism. There's a weak capacity in delivering state essential services such as health and education. And even competitive federalism could not help in improving service delivery. Competitive federalism has been a powerful agent of change in relation to attracting investment and talent, but not in the area of service delivery. And there are a lot of good models you can find. For example, for public distribution system in Chhattisgarh, they are using biometric system. Incentivizing of agriculture in MP, a huge step. Kerosene-free drive in Haryana. And point number 4, power sector reforms in Gujarat. Efficiency of social programs in Tamil Nadu, right? So all these are kind of role models for the other states to follow. But No good models are there in the area of health and education in the entire country. No state was able to tackle these two problems because we have a very weak state capacity in delivering essential services like health and education. So this is the problem the economic survey is highlighting here. Okay, now what is the reason for the weak state capacity, not only in the terms of health and education, overall government capacity? Why is it weak? Why are we not able to efficiently deliver these services? Because of the abundant caution in the decision making. That is what it says. It says that the bureaucrats and government officials have a status quoist kind of tendency. The fear of the referee institutions is too much, so they don't want to take too much risk. So this is one of the reasons for the state's weak capacity in service delivery. Now let's come to the inefficient redistribution. So economic survey says that all countries redistribute, and they must do. So what is redistribution? Redistribution is you collect tax from the top and the middle layer of your population, and then you redistribute it to the bottom layer with the help of some benefit schemes and all those things. Economic survey says that all countries redistribute, and they must do so. So the question is how effective this is. Government of India has programs to help the poor through subsidies and through government programs such as Manrega, Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan, Integrated Child Development Scheme, and all those things. But the problem is there is a poor efficiency in targeting the poor, and the welfare spending suffers from a considerable misallocation. So if we see this particular map, in the first map it shows the share of the overall poor. So the red districts are actually the poorest districts, and in the second map you can see the shortfall in allocation to the poor. So you can see the red districts in the first map and the second map are actually overlapping. You can see the Bihar region, Eastern Uttar Pradesh and the Bihar region here. The poorest districts are getting the lowest funds. So the misallocation is highest in the poorest district. So the people who are deserving the most are actually getting neglected. So the welfare spending is not efficient because of leakages and pilferages. Now government has employed technology also in this, for example direct benefit transfer. So what is the possible explanation for this kind of development? So economic survey says that India has followed a unique pathway to economic success, which is Precocious and Cleavaged India. Let's understand. So what is unique in our path to success? So it says that today's advanced economies achieved their current status over 2 centuries, in which the economic and political development progressed slowly but steadily. And these countries did not begin with a universal franchisee. Everyone was not having a right to vote initially. There were only few voters, so pressure on the government was less. And it was good because the state capacity initially was weak. But India is a precocious democracy, so India was not able to take advantage of this growth path. And the second set of accelerated economic successes, mostly in the East Asia, they began with authoritarian regimes, for example Korea, China, Singapore, Thailand, Taiwan, etc. And this gave way to political transformation. But that political transformation happened, the democracy came only after a degree of economic success was achieved. Right? So what economic survey tries to say here is that in some cases there was slow and steady economic and political development. Right, and in some cases there was accelerated economic success because here there was authoritarian rule initially, and later came the democracy after little economic success was achieved. And in the case 1, there was democracy from the starting, but the universal franchise was not given. Everyone was not having voting rights, so pressure on the state to provide essential services was less. So state capacity was weak, and that time the pressure was less, so it was in the favor of the economy. And slowly the state capacity increased, and then they expanded the voting rights to overall population. Okay, but that is not the case with India. India is a democracy from the starting, right? So that is how our growth path to success is actually unique. Okay, and India is also cleavage society, cleavaged India. So on the y-axis you can see the ethnic fractionalization, and on the x-axis you have GDP per capita at independence. So you can see India is here. So it was very poor. The GDP per capita was too low. That's why it is on the left hand side. And ethnic fractionalization was too high. That's why it is on the north end of the graph, because it is divided along the lines of language, script, religion, region, caste, gender, class, and whatnot. Right, so India is a clear outlier in the northwest corner of the plot, indicating both high levels of poverty and deep social division. This is what we observed from this particular graph. Now let's come to another related aspect, the early redistribution. So it says that legitimacy to redistribute is earned through a demonstrated record of effectiveness in delivering essential services. What does this mean? So economic survey says that the history of Europe and the US suggests that typically the states provide essential services, for example physical security, health, education, infrastructure first before they take on their redistribution role. Right, so they try to establish their legitimacy, they try to establish their effectiveness with the help of providing efficient essential services, and then they go into the role of redistribution. And this sequence is not accidental, it is required, because unless the middle class in the society perceives that it derives some benefit from the state, it will not be willing to finance redistribution. It will indulge into tax avoidance and tax evasion and all those things, right? So if these conditions are not met, the middle class will try to exit from the state, right? So what is the sign of this exit? One of the signs of this exit is few taxpayers. So you can see the India's performance is not good on this particular front. So Indian government took the role of redistribution from the day one of independence. So this is one place where we have gone in a different way from the expected behavior. Okay. And this is visible in India's low tax base. We have only 7 taxpayers for 100 voters, right? And this is one more graph. Here it shows the number of taxpayers to voting age population cross-country comparison. So this is the condition of India. We have only 7 taxpayers per 100 voters. So what is the conclusion here? The economic survey says that India has come a long way in terms of economic performance and reforms, but there's still a journey ahead to achieve both dynamism and social justice. Being a precocious and democracy and a cleavage society, this is the growth path which India has traversed. It is different from what is observed from the other parts of the world. But there is still a huge scope of reforms to enhance performance. We have to go ahead and improve the state capacity to deliver essential services, and we have to involve private sector into economic growth and development of the country. And government has to bring in efficiency in its redistribution programs, right? So that's all in this chapter. Now let's have a quick recap. So first we started the chapter with the evolution of Indian economy. So there was a pre-1991 era where we have pursued social agenda for around half a century, and there was a dominance of public sector. There was protectionist tendency in India, and it was basically a license quota arbitrage. Then post 1991, after LPG reforms, so this is an era of openness in terms of trade, in terms of capital, in terms of involvement of the private sector in the economy. And what are the challenges we are facing today? The first challenge is ambivalence towards private sector, and because of that exit problem is there, right? And twin balance sheet problem. Because of ambivalence towards private sector, we have a strong anti-market sentiment. We have seen the graphs. Then weak state capacity, for example, the poor health and education services provided by the government, right? Inefficient redistribution, and beneficiary identification has been very difficult for us because of the inclusion and exclusion errors, right? And what is the explanation for our kind of development? The first thing is precocious democracy. This is also responsible for the path which we are traversing now, because we indulge into early redistribution. That is why the government was not able to prove its legitimacy or its effectiveness in providing the essential services. That is why the middle class will try to evade the taxes or avoid the taxes. So the tax base is very low in India. There are only 7 taxpayers per 100 voters, and we live in a very cleavage society, and we are divided along the lines of language, script, religion, region, caste, gender and class. So because of these 2 reasons, India's growth story is actually unique, right? And we have to overcome these challenges in order to grow faster. That's all guys in this chapter. Please do like, comment, subscribe and share. If you like this particular video, you can put your comments in the comment section below, and you can visit our page on Facebook and download these slides from there. The download link is provided in the description section below. So we will come back with the 3rd chapter soon. Till then, take care. See you soon.